Hi, thanks for joining me. Mindy Mandell here. And today I'm going to continue this series of videos on the Republic. As you can see, today we're finishing up book 4, and I'm going to focus on justice in the soul. So Socrates says, we've made out these 3 forms in our city, the other 3 virtues, to the best of our present judgment. What can be the remaining form that would give the city still another virtue? For it is obvious that the remainder is justice. And as I've been doing throughout the Republic, all these translations are from Paul Shorey, but I did adjust them to put in script form for us. So what he's talking about here, the other 3 virtues, wisdom, courage, and in this translation, soberness, often temperance. Today, though, we're focusing on justice, and this is, of course, the theme of this entire dialogue. And so there's quite a bit more written about justice than about the other 3 virtues. So I covered all 3 of them last week. Today I'm focusing only on justice. And Socrates says, why, all the time, bless your heart, the thing apparently was tumbling about our feet from the start, and yet we couldn't see it. But we were most ludicrous, like people who sometimes hunt for what they hold in their hands. So we did not turn our eyes upon it, but we looked off into the distance, which is perhaps the reason it escaped us. And I think this is a common image of justice, that it's something lofty, it's something out there, it's something beyond us that we can't quite understand. However, for Socrates and for Plato, they're going to talk about justice in a way that is actually within us. And so it's within our grasp to know it. And so I think that's what he's referring to here. Now, in order to show this view of justice, or this way of understanding justice, to understand what they mean by the word justice, Socrates is going to have to take kind of a roundabout way. So he's going to start with that analogy of the city-state, and then he's going to work his way around to its analog, the soul. So he starts off with this. What we lay down in the beginning as a universal requirement when we were founding our city, this, I think, or some form of this, is justice. And what we did lay down, and often said, if you recall, was that each one man must perform one social service in the state for which his nature was best adapted. Yes, we said that. And again, that to do one's own business and not to be a busybody is justice, is a saying that we have heard from many and have very often repeated ourselves. We have. This, then, my friend, if taken in a certain sense, appears to be justice, this principle of doing one's own business. Do you know whence I infer this? No, but tell me. I think that this is the remaining virtue in the state, after our consideration of soberness, courage, and intelligence or wisdom, a quality which made it possible for them all to grow up in the body politic, and which, when they have sprung up, preserves them as long as it is present. I hardly need to remind you that we said that justice would be the residue after we had found the other 3. Okay, so what we see here is that justice, whatever it is, he hasn't explained it yet, is a quality that makes it possible for the other virtues to grow up in the body politic, or in the soul, in the analog. And when these other virtues have sprung up, justice, whatever that is, it preserves them as long as it is present. Okay, now again, he's going to start by talking about the city-state, and then he's going to bring it around to the soul. But when I fancy one who is by nature an artisan or some kind of money-maker, tempted and incited by wealth or command of votes or bodily strength or some similar advantage, tries to enter into the class of the soldiers, or one of the soldiers wants to enter into the class of counselors and guardians, for which he's not fitted, and these interchange their tools and their honors, or when the same man undertakes all these functions at once, then I take it you too believe that this kind of substitution and meddlesomeness is the ruin of the state, by all means. Okay, before I go on with this quote, though, I do want to talk about the words that I put in bold. So these are the different categories of people that he created for the city-state. Now, you may recall that initially the guardians were a wider class of people. And then the best of the guardians were pulled out, and those were called rulers. And then last week we saw that he started using the word guardian for only the rulers. And he also called them counselors, because one of the definitions of wisdom was having good counsel. And so the guardians became the rulers are now called guardians, which means now he's using the word soldiers for that wider use that was guardian initially. And so we have these three categories. And we can organize them in this way. We'll go to that bottom paragraph in a moment. But first, remember we saw that wisdom was the smallest of the three. The smallest number of people would be the ones who represent wisdom in the soul. And then we saw that the artisans or moneymakers are the majority of people in the community or in the city-state. The soldiers then in the middle, because they are the ones who protect the guardians. And he says that the interference with one another's business of the three existent classes and the substitution of the one for the other is the greatest injury to a state, and would most rightly be designated as the thing which chiefly works at harm. Now, at the level of the city-state, I think we can think of examples where, like, for example, an average citizen may join the National Guard and be a soldier part-time. Or, we can think of examples where we would mix, and it's not really a big deal. It's at the level of soul that we see this is significant, where he's going to talk about what he calls or what academia actually calls the tripartite soul. And there are three parts of the soul, and the virtues are connected to those, or can be understood through that tripartite soul. And this separation then becomes a significant part of the understanding of what justice is. And so that's what we're going to turn to now. Now let us work out the inquiry in which we supposed that if we found some larger thing that contained justice and viewed it there, we should more easily discover its nature in the individual man. And we agreed that this larger thing is the city, and so we constructed the best city in our power, well knowing that in the good city it would, of course, be found. What then we thought we saw there, we must refer back to the individual, and if it is confirmed, all will be well. But if something different manifests itself in the individual, we will return again to the state and test it there. And it may be that by examining them side by side and rubbing them against one another, as it were from the fire sticks, we may cause the spark of justice to flash forth. And when it is thus revealed, confirm it in our own minds. So this is a reminder of the analogy that had been set up, a reminder that we're only looking at a city-state because we want to better understand the soul. He says, now the city was thought to be just because three natural kinds existing in it performed each its own function. And again, it was sober, brave, and wise because of certain other affections and habits of these three kinds. True. Then, my friend, we shall thus expect the individual also to have these same forms in his soul, and by reason of identical affections of these with those in the city, to receive properly the same appellations. Inevitable. So we can take that earlier triangle and we can add now we can add wisdom, courage, and soberness. And so wisdom most closely is associated with these guardians, the smallest number within the city-state, and courage or bravery to the soldiers who guard the guardians and who protect them. And then the majority of people is at least loosely associated with temperance or soberness. We saw last week that, properly speaking, we think of temperance as something that is the harmony that runs through all three, but it's generally associated with this lowest part of the soul because the desires, this is going to be connected to the desiring part of the soul. And when the temperance is the state of mind that develops when the desires naturally fall in line with wisdom. Okay, so Socrates raises the question of whether we learn with one part of ourselves, feel anger with another, and with yet a third desire the pleasures of nutrition and generation in their kind, or whether it is with the entire soul that we function in each case. So here he's ready to build the argument for the tripartite soul. But in order to make the case, he has to examine the question of whether there really are different parts of the soul, different affections in the soul, or whether it is always the entire soul that is functioning in each case. So first he's going to take a look at the desires versus other parts of the soul. This first part here, I'm going to read it and then I'll explain it a little because the wording is a bit clumsy. Then if the drink is of a certain kind, so is the thirst. But thirst that is just thirst is neither of much, nor little, nor good, nor bad, nor in a word of any kind. But just thirst is naturally of just drink only. It's a little clumsy there, but he's actually simplifying things. He was saying here that he wants to focus on just the things themselves, on the nouns, if you will, thirst and drink. He doesn't want to put any adjectives, any qualifications. So just keeping it as the simplest argument possible. Just thirst is naturally of just drink only. By all means, Glaucon says. The soul of the thirsty, then, is insofar as it thirsts, wishes nothing else than to drink, and it yearns for this, and its impulse is toward this, obviously. Then if anything draws it back when thirsty, it must be something different in it from that which thirsts, and drives it like a beast to drink. For it cannot be, we say, that the same thing with the same part of itself at the same time acts in opposite ways about the same thing. We must admit that it does not. Not unreasonably shall we claim that they are two and different from one another, naming that in the soul whereby it reckons and reasons, the rational, and that with which it loves, hungers, thirsts, and feels the flutter and titillation of other desires, the irrational and appetitive, companion of various repletions and pleasures. So we see here two parts of the soul have now been named. The rational part that reckons and reasons, and then the part that desires is called irrational, and here this is not a negative connotation, just a neutral one, and appetitive, meaning it desires. And so we can add these two to our triangle here. As we saw before, the Greek word for the rational part of the soul is logos, and the Greek word for the appetitive part of the soul is the epithumia. So we have these two parts now named. There's only one missing, and that is thumos in Greek, or it's the high-spirited part of the soul. So Socrates says, these two forms then, let us assume, have been marked off as actually existing in the soul. But now the thumos, or the principle of high spirit, that with which we feel anger, is a third. Or would it be identical in nature with one of these? So now he's going to give some examples to show the thumos functioning differently from the other two parts. He says, I once heard a story which I believe, that Leontius, the son of Aglaon, on his way up from the Piraeus under the outer side of the northern wall, becoming aware of dead bodies that lay at the place of public execution, at the same time he felt a desire to see them and a repugnance and aversion, and that for a time he resisted and he veiled his head, but he was overpowered in despite of all by his desire, and with wide staring eyes he rushed up to the corpses and cried, there, ye wretches, take your fill of the fine spectacle. So there he's showing a separation between the thumos and the epithumia. Do we not on many other occasions observe when his desires constrain a man contrary to his reason, that he reviles himself and is angry with that within which masters him, and that as it were in a faction of two parties, the high spirit of such a man becomes the ally of his reason? So there he's showing that at our best, the high-spirited part, when it's properly functioning, is an ally of the logos, or the reasoning part of the soul. When a man thinks himself to be in the wrong, is it not true that the nobler he is, the less is he capable of anger, though suffering hunger and cold and whatsoever else at the hands of him whom he believes to be acting justly therein? And as I say, his spirit refuses to be aroused against such a one? True. But what when a man believes himself to be wronged? Does not his spirit in that case seethe and grow fierce, and also because of his suffering hunger, cold, and the like, and make itself the ally of what he judges just? And in noble souls it endures and wins the victory, and will not let go until either it achieves its purpose, or death ends all, or, as a dog is called back by a shepherd, it is called back by the reason within and calmed. Now, what we see, I think, very much throughout the Republic is that even though this is a philosophical dialogue, Plato and Socrates seem to have had a very good grasp of psychology or human nature. And what we're seeing here, what is being pointed out here, is that anger is rooted in perceptions of injustice. And actually, if you look at your own life, even the most mundane things like getting a parking ticket, you're only going to be angry if you feel it's an injustice. You know, everybody parks here. I was only here for 3 minutes and I got a ticket. Then you feel angry. But if you know you parked where you weren't supposed to and you were there too long and you got a ticket, you think, you're upset, but you're not angry. So all anger is rooted in perceptions of injustice, and that's what we're seeing here. That if you know you're wrong, you're not going to be angry. If you feel that the punishment that you receive or the suffering that you're going through is just, you're not going to be angry. But in the bottom paragraph, where the situation where a person believes himself to be wronged, then the person gets angry. And so that's the thumos. That's the function of the thumos. Just as in a city there were 3 existing kinds that composed its structure, the moneymakers, the helpers, the counselors, so also in the soul does there exist a 3rd kind, this principle of high spirit, which is the helper of reason by nature, unless it is corrupted by evil nurture. And we have to assume it is a 3rd, Glaucon says. So notice here that now he changed the name once again. Instead of, now he's calling these helpers. What was he calling them before? I forget. But now he's calling them helpers, and I think it's because here he's calling them the helper of reason. This is the function of the thumos. Okay, they were soldiers before. So now the counselors, the guardians, the counselors or guardians now became just counselors, and the soldiers are now helpers. And so here once again is our little diagram. You see the logos, the thumos, and the epithumia, roughly connected to wisdom, courage, and temperance. And so now we're finally going to tie in justice. So now that he set all that up, he set up the tripartite soul, he's ready to explain how he understands justice. Through these waters, then, we have with difficulty made our way, and we are fairly agreed that the same kinds equal in number are to be found in the state and in the soul of each one of us. That is soul. Then does not the necessity of our former postulate immediately follow? That as and whereby the state was wise, so and thereby is the individual wise. Surely. And so, whereby and as the individual is brave, thereby and so is the state brave. And that both should have all the other constituents of virtue in the same way? Necessarily. Just two, then, Glaucon, I presume we shall say a man is in the same way in which a city... Oh, I'm sorry. This sentence is a little clumsy. Here, justice and justice. Just two, then, Glaucon, I presume we shall say a man is in the same way in which a city was just. That, too, is quite inevitable. Excuse me. But we surely cannot have forgotten this, that the state was just by reason of each of the 3 classes found in it fulfilling its own function. I don't think we have forgotten. We must remember then that each of us also, in whom the several parts within him perform each their own task, he will be a just man and one who minds his own affair. We must indeed remember. And so now we're tying the other 3 together with justice. That justice is the proper order and balance among the 3 parts of the soul. So ideally, wisdom is what guides the soul. Courage is the thumos that defends the wisdom of the soul. And the epithumia, the desiring part of the soul, should fall in line with wisdom. So when the thumos and the epithumia recognize that the logos should be the leader and they are the ones being led, then you have justice in the soul, this proper order and balance. And so here's how he describes it. The truth of the matter was, as it seems, that justice is indeed something of this kind, yet not in regard to the doing of one's own business externally, but with regard to that which is within, and in the true sense concerns oneself and the things of oneself. Okay, so I want to point out here that self here is in that highest metaphysical sense. Justice is in regards to what concerns oneself in the highest sense, in the things of oneself. It means that a man must not suffer the principles in his soul to do each the work of some other and interfere and meddle with one another, but that he should dispose well of what, in the true sense of the word, is properly his own. And having first attained to self-mastery and beautiful order within himself, and having harmonized these three principles, the notes or intervals of three terms, quite literally the lowest, the highest, and the mean, and all others there may be between them, and having linked and bound all three together, and made of himself a unit, one man instead of many, self-controlled, and in unison. So again, that idea of unity that's been running throughout the dialogue. Once a person has achieved this, he should then and then only turn to practice if he find aught to do, either in the getting of wealth or the tendance of the body, or it may be in political action or private business. In all such doings, believing and naming the just and honorable action to be that which preserves and helps to produce this condition of soul. And wisdom is the name of the science that presides over such conduct. And believing and naming the unjust action to be that which ever tends to overthrow the spiritual constitution. And brutish ignorance is the name of that which is the opinion that in turn presides over this unjust action. Okay, so that is his understanding of justice and what Plato and Socrates mean by justice. Now, to wrap things up here, he's going to then consider injustice. Then to act unjustly and be unjust, and in turn to act justly, the meaning of all these terms becomes at once plain and clear, since injustice and justice are so. How so? Because these are in the soul what the healthful and the diseaseful are in the body. There is no difference. In what respect? Healthful things surely engender health, and diseaseful disease. Yes. Then does not doing just acts engender justice, and unjust acts engender injustice, of necessity? But to produce health is to establish the elements in a body in the natural relation of dominating and being dominated by one another, while to cause disease is to bring it about that one rules or is ruled by the other contrary to nature. Yes, that is so. And is it not likewise the production of justice in the soul to establish its principles in the natural relation of controlling and being controlled by one another, while injustice is to cause the one to rule or be ruled by the other contrary to nature? Exactly so. So for Plato and for Socrates, justice is the natural ordering, this proper ordering that I talked about earlier is natural. For the thumos or the epithumia to be leading the soul is unnatural. And so that is what they mean by injustice. And so also whenever you see good and evil talked about in terms of the soul, it's not in the biblical sense of the way we use good and evil. It's in this idea of healthy or unhealthy, natural or unnatural, just or unjust. Virtue, then, as it seems, would be a kind of health and beauty and good condition of soul, and vice would be disease, ugliness, and weakness. It is so. Then is it not also true that beautiful and honorable pursuits tend to the winning of virtue, and the ugly to vice, of necessity? Okay, so that wraps up his understanding of what he means by justice. And now at last, it seems, It remains for us to consider whether it is profitable to do justice and practice honorable pursuits and be just, whether one is known to be such or not, or whether injustice profits and to be unjust, if only a man escape punishment and is not bettered by chastisement. So again, this is going back, of course, to the original challenge that Socrates was given and why he had created the city-state in the first place. This was the challenge given to him. But at this point, if you understand what he says about justice as this natural ordering that brings health to the soul, then you can see very clearly that for Socrates, what he means by justice is something which is of value, whether you get credit for it in society or not. And so Glaucon says, nay, Socrates, I think that from this point on, our inquiry becomes an absurdity. If, while life is admittedly intolerable with a ruined constitution of body, even though accompanied by all the food and drink and wealth and power in the world, so it would be with the soul even worse. And truly, now that we have come to this height of argument, I seem to see as from a point of outlook that there is one form of excellence, and that the forms of evil or unhealthiness are infinite, yet that there are some four among them that it is worthwhile to take note of. Now, the reason this is here is because this is a bit of foreshadowing of what is to come. So we're going to see, especially when we get to books 8 and 9, that Socrates is going to talk about different forms of government, political constitutions, and he's going to connect them to different characters of soul. And this is foreshadowing of that. So Glaucon asks, what do you mean? As many as are the varieties of political constitutions that constitute specific types, so many, it seems likely, are the characters of soul. How many, pray? There are 5 kinds of constitutions and 5 kinds of soul. Okay, so that's a bit of foreshadowing. But next week, what we're going to do is going into book 5, now that he has basically completed the task that was given to him in the beginning there in book 2. Now what he's going to do is show the height of virtue or justice is what is known in this dialogue as the philosopher king. And that's what we're going to look at next week. I do hope you'll join me. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, there is a link for an email account if you want to send me a longer email, or you can just put a comment below. And as always, I'd appreciate a like, and also please think about subscribing if you don't already, because I do put out a new video each week. So thank you very much. I hope you'll join me next week.